Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave, and we'd love to hear where you think we've got it right and where you think we've got it completely backwards, which you can do on unsilentpodcast.com, our Rumble channel, or other social media channels. So, Brian, what's on your mind this week?
Well, what you got? You had something you wanted to share with me this time.
Well, sure, I do. I do actually. Yeah, I do. So we've been talking about, institutional trust and the lack thereof, and how the elites have worked really hard and bemoaned the degradation in institutional trust that we see in Western societies in the U.S., et cetera. And, thinking about that a little bit more, I saw a quote come from Jonah Goldberg, who I'm sure you know, that talks a little bit about institutions. I think there's something in here that's worth discussing a little bit. And so
forgive me, Dave. I don't know who Jonah Goldberg is. You'll have to fill me in.
He's a commentator. He used to be with one of the big papers. I don't remember which one. He's a modern commentator. So he's in the current sphere of people that say things.
Okay,
not quite as eloquently as we do, but he's there. So.
Yeah, well, he probably didn't go to Evergreen State, so he's got that working against him.
Yeah, well, he can't keep up for that reason, I'm sure. All right, so here's an interesting thing about institutions. People understand tradition, but sometimes struggle with the full meaning of institutions. When we hear institution, we think of things like foundations, universities, courts, or corporations. But fundamentally, the economists have it right. Institutions are rules. The free market is the institution, by which I mean it is a system of rules and tradition as much as anything binds us to that system. The same goes for democracy, religion, or science. There are buildings full of people who help uphold these rules, but the rules are prior to the buildings and the people. The Marines are an institution, but what makes the Marines different than the police or the Shriners are the rules, formal and informal, that the Marines follow. The Catholic Church is a bunch of buildings, priests, nuns, and adherents, but what makes them the church are the rules and the customs that define Catholicism. So I found this a very interesting concept. So, when you think of institutions, typically the thing that pops into people's minds are the buildings and the structures and the bureaucracies and all of that. And at different times in our lives, the institutions have had different levels of respect, shall we say. So the institution of the police, the institution of Congress, the institution of the military, whatever, have had higher or lower levels of trust in society. These days,
Wall Street, banking, the media, academia,
churches,
like all these
everything.
things. Yeah, 100%.
Everything.
Yeah.
But what Goldberg is pointing at, and right now, of course, institutional trust in all of them is at historic lows. I mean, people, trust or are enamored with a pile of poop on the pavement more than they are Congress. So, but
real quick on that, I think that for right now, I would assess half the country does not trust the foundational concepts of the institution of the United States of America. Like they think we thought to throw out the Constitution, things like that. And the other half the country still believes in those things, but doesn't trust the quote unquote institutions that are there to support it.
Right. And what he gets to here, I think the two things that he talks about that really got me thinking about this are rules and traditions. So there's the institutions themselves, but what makes us have or lose trust is how those rules and traditions are being manipulated, altered, or changes being forced on them. So, so if you take a look at the rules that govern a civil society, when one group decides we're going to change them and you have no input into how those rules change, and we're going to change them despite the traditions that have made us what we are, or that we believe have made us what we are, then and this is where the great, I think, anger and angst comes in about how these things have changed. Not so much that, well, the police have always been corrupt, but no, or the military or Congress or whatever. But you have decided on your own to change the rules of the game, to change
Right.
the traditions that we have always just walked in and believed in. And so I
Yep.
think that digs one level deeper into this collapse that we've seen.
Yeah, and I think that what exacerbates that is, in many cases, I think people are aware that the changes are happening, but the people making the changes won't come clean about they're actually making changes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's the redefinition, and we talked about this before, the
Yeah.
redefinition of democracy, for instance. So
Right.
no, we're not changing anything. This is what democracy has always meant.
Yeah,
It's
it's
sort
always
of
been
that
like this.
it's Orwellian, right? I mean, that's really
Yeah.
truly Orwellian. Is no, this is what is so, or this is a better version of a more perfect union than we had before. So it really hasn't changed at all, and you're just a conspiracy theorist.
Right. Right. And you see this like one of the videos I saved for this week. I got a million of them that no, my collection of videos is like piling up right now. So I'm not gonna share all these, but um one of the videos I saw this week was FEMA. Now we have these
Mhm.
two we're between two massive hurricanes. Like
Right.
I think they're both like in the top 10 of all time or something like that.
Yeah.
We're in the middle of Helene and Milton.
Milton.
And this video of a Zoom call for FEMA surfaced that was from last year, 2023, in which they're talking about the need to prioritize the needs of the LGBTQ plus community because they suffer a lot already. And then on top of that, they have these disasters and whatever. So we need to prioritize their needs
Right.
because they're the one. And so here's an institution, FEMA, part of the Department of Homeland Security, another big institution, part of the U.S. government, another institution that has quietly and not so quietly, depending on how much exposure they want and how much they think it'll be favorable to be seen saying these things or not,
Right.
making these decisions that prioritize the needs of some people over others when our entire philosophy, even though we failed at it miserably at times, has been that all people are treated equally.
Right. And that's the rule. The rule has been
Right.
the rule for our country has been it doesn't matter if you're black, white, red, brown, purple, gay, straight, whatever. And as you say, we failed at this over and over because that is absolutely our history.
People are
Uh,
people.
but
People do
those
dumb
are
things.
Exactly. But those are the rules. Those are the given
Right.
rules. And when you change those rules and nobody gets a say in how those rules are changed except the elites, then you truly do have sort of I don't want to call it a coup, but it's not too far off from that, is it?
Yeah, I would say it's a hijacking for sure in some
Yeah.
cases.
Yeah.
And in the other case, I think what we've experienced over the last, I would say 30, 40 years is an increasing amount of delegation of responsibility. And so we just end up with bad outcomes. Like specifically, I mean, like look at how your average congressman now has delegated responsibility to their staff, their second year person out of
Right.
college who's there to like run the errands and like do research and all that kinds of stuff, and delegated responsibility to lobbyists. Again, when I was going through the process of actually writing a state law, a bill that became a state law, one of the things that shocked me the most was learning from our lobbyists how often a vote will be called, and this is at state level, so I can't speak to the federal level, but how often a vote would be due, and the legislator would come out to the hallway and ask the lobbyists, which way am I voting on this again? And they would go in and vote that way because they delegated the research and the responsibility of whether or not this is a good thing to the
Right.
lobbyist, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
we end up with outcomes like if you listen, I don't know if you've listened to Casey and Callie Means, they were part of the
Mhm.
RFK camp, and they're big
Okay.
on the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again.
Hmm.
They're like the ones driving a lot of that,
Right.
and the statistics that they rattle off of like going back to let's say 1960, the percentage of kids that had type 2 diabetes and the percentage of kids who had chronic illnesses and the percentage of kids who had autism and things like that is minuscule back then. The
Right.
percentage of or the number of dollars we spent as a country working on chronic illnesses was zero in 1960 or 62 or whatever, and
Right.
now it's off the charts. So these
Quoted.
bad outcomes have happened not only because of corruption and misplaced prioritize to make people consciously do bad things, but they've delegated so much responsibility they're unconsciously just finding themselves in bad outcomes because nobody's looking out for this stuff. The lobbyists are in it for them. The
Right.
staffers are in it for them. The legislators are in it for them, and nobody's in it for the people.
Right. Well, and it's because it certainly is because our system, they talk about rewards and punishments or incentives. The system
Right.
of incentives is set up in a perverse way now.
Right.
I mean, maybe it always was, but people didn't realize, how they could get by with it before. But it's
Yeah.
set up in such a perverse way that the lobbyists are just doing what the lobbyists are paid to do, right? I mean, they're there to
Yeah.
sell their goods. They're there to influence them. But the problem, I think, is then the politicians um, have become lazy and become bought and sold by the lobbyists,
Yeah.
and it becomes a career advancement thing. We've talked about this before. The
Yeah.
notion of where I'm going to go to Washington, I'm going to do these things, I'm going to move into media where I can make some real money, sell my book, become a millionaire, live in Martha's Vineyard. It's become this kind of churning of a perverse system that has left nobody. There's nobody, like you said, there's nobody minding the store for the people. There's nobody there that's
Right.
real. I think there's a lot of people, congressmen and congress people and senators, etc. I think there's a number of people that go there with good intentions.
Yeah.
But
Of
I think
course.
what ends up happening is both they get sucked into the system, and the perverse incentives of the system are just too enticing.
Yeah, and I think also there's I guess I would say a softness of our society that's evolved over the last, again, I would say 40 years or so, where let's just take the healthcare stuff. Like
Right.
there's stuff that we buy from other countries, Germany and China, pesticides that we put like 7 billion metric tons or whatever, 70 billion pounds, whatever it is. It's a huge number
Yeah.
of these pesticides on our crops every year in the US, bought from countries like Germany and China who have banned these things in their countries,
Right.
right? There's You can't buy the Fruit Loops you buy in Canada is not the same as the Fruit Loops you buy in the US because
Right.
Canada has banned red dye number 6 or whatever it is, right?
Right. Right.
But if you were a congressman and said, "I want to take up this fight," and you went to the American people and said, "I'm fighting to ban this stuff," they would be voted out of office because people would hear, "You're going to increase the cost of our food."
Right.
And so the populace has gotten lazy, I think, and has
Yeah.
delegated their responsibility of like taking the time to work through fairly complex problems and like, what do I think is the right thing here? It's the NIMBY thing. I don't have to deal with it. Like you go take care of it. Like I don't want it to be my problem. It's your problem. And
Yeah.
so the Congress people, not only they incentivize by all the money and prestige and the great jobs that come to follow when you're the chair of whatever committee and over Wall Street, and then you go get a job as a compliance
Right.
officer for a big Wall Street bank or something. So you have all those things. But also, if you go down the other path, you're voted out of office because people don't want to hear the bad news.
Right. Well, in a lot of it, I think, there was, I wish I knew the quote off the top of my head, but there's the quote that talks about how it's old Roman Empire times when they talked about how as long as you give the people bread and circuses, you can do whatever you want, and I think
Yeah.
it really has become, we've got our iPhones, we've got our technology, we've got our 42 different streaming services, and we can
Yeah.
keep ourselves entertained and satiated on, I've started this, speaking about health, I've started looking at the ingredients of the stuff that I eat.
Yeah.
And, I've tried, and then I'm looking at the ingredients of the 100% natural stuff that I eat. It's still right. It's still a paragraph of things. I'm a relatively intelligent, well-connected person. I understand a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
but I can't understand half this. I've got a daughter who's a PhD in chemistry. I need her to decipher what's in the potato chips that I eat because
Yeah.
it's not potato chips anymore. So, I mean,
It's
so we keep ourselves, well, and I think about how all of this could happen to us, how we could be in this spot. And it's really because we have become so affluent and so dedicated to our own comfort and our own pleasure and our
yeah.
own, lack of any, challenges
Yeah.
that
Short-term gratification.
short-term gratification. The only challenges we've got are the people that we're told we need to be angry with on social media. Those are the only
Yeah.
challenges. And those are comfortable challenges for us as a society to have, because then we can just point at those people out there and say, well, those, evil rubes are going to put an end to democracy. I'm not going to be able to get my Cheetos that are made up of more chemicals than were exuded in 3 Mile Island.
The chemicals in the food is just such a not to harp on the health stuff too much, but my wife started using this app called Yuka or something like that. It's YUKA, and this
Mm-hmm.
is not a plug for that. We don't get paid for that, but she started using this like 6 months ago. Our kids told us about it, and she started using this app. And you scan the barcode on a thing, it gives you a score of 0 to 100, or like 100's good and 0's bad, based on the preservatives and chemicals and things like
Oh,
that.
really?
And so we've been eating much healthier, making better food choices based on this app. And by the way, I do feel a lot better, and I've lost like 30 pounds, like just
Wow.
doing, stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but what was interesting to us is we scanned a grocery store brand sour cream and a name brand sour cream. The sour cream with the name brand had three ingredients: milk, water, and like salt or something like that. And the store brand one had like literally like 22 chemicals, and milk or whatever was not one of the one of the ingredients. And so you look at that and you go like, how in the world are we in a situation where this has happened? And I think it's
Yeah.
because either the people writing the laws have delegated that responsibility and they just like drifted into this situation, or they've been corrupted in monetarily or prestige wise or lucrative jobs they've been incentivized to help lead us down this path, losing sight of the big picture on these things.
That reminds me. I think it was. Do you remember Judge Robert Bork?
Uh-uh.
So he was nominated to be a Supreme Court judge. I think it was during Reagan's term, if I remember correctly, and a brilliant guy. And he was, he became a verb. He'd been borked, and he was brought up, and they said all sorts of false things about him. And he would have been a great Supreme Court judge. I think he was the one that wrote the book Slouching into Gomorrah. And so the notion was that America has just kind of slouched its way into this decadent, corrupt place that we're at right now. And really slouching is a good word for it, because I think and it's not just one thing. Typically, a great societal, multifaceted octopus of sets of problems doesn't happen by just one thing. So I think there's a great amount of slouching that has happened that he points out in that book. I think there's another part of it. There's another book that I read, the Death of Common Sense, talking about how I think it was that one that talked about how there's too many laws. So there's all of these things that happened that sort of take us away from the basic reality. I think of when I grew up, and the basic reality of my life was I went to school, I came home, my mom made things like potatoes and asparagus. There was like one ingredient in each one of these things. Again, we're on the sort of a health thing today, and that's fine. But it's illustrative, I think, of where we're at as a society. Everything's either too complex to consider, and so we let the lobbyists and the politicians and the bureaucrats and the expert class tell us what we should do, and then we fill our brain with images by Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu and 42 different streaming channels. All of this stuff together has really pushed us into this place. And I think, as has been the theme of this podcast from the beginning, I think the only thing that really gets us out of it, I mean, we can do things, and like, I applaud you for that. I'm gonna have to look up that app, because I need that app, because I'm getting tired of looking at these things, and I can't even see them. They're so small. I just can't even see the ingredients on this stuff. Like,
A
one of my
6-point font that you're trying to read on the back
yeah,
of a
exactly.
sour
And I mean,
cream container.
I get the fancy eye surgery, so I didn't have to wear glasses anymore. I still can't see the stupid
Yeah.
stuff. But all of these things together, we can do little things, but how do you combat all of them? The only way that's going to combat all of them is like a hurricane type event for the entire society that comes through, that reduces things back to a point where we have to concentrate on, no, let's do the basic things. Let's do them right. Let's do family. Let's do faith. Let's do country. Let's do community. Let's do all of these things right, and kind of get back, not to our sins of the past, but let's get back to our successes in the past, the things that have made us successful. And that's going to be painful, but I believe it's coming.
Well, I think that like using that Zoom call that's going around Twitter right now of the FEMA conversation, I
Yes.
think those kinds of things expose these things that's
Yeah.
been out for a year and nobody cared about it. But now in the midst of this hurricane where the government has decided to generously dole out a $750 loan per household to the victims of Hurricane Helene,
Yeah.
much like they did the people in Maui. And then you go, wait a second, a $750 loan per household for these US citizens compared to the billions we've given to Ukraine, the billions we've given to Iran, the billions we've given to illegal immigrants coming across, all this money going to people who are not citizens here. And then also in a hurricane situation, who couldn't say, my life sucked before this and now it sucks even worse? Like, yeah, okay, the LGBTQ crowd has their things, no question. But
Sure.
let's
Mhm.
say you're not an LGBTQ person and you're just a, you know, heterosexual married couple with a couple middle class blue collar jobs or whatever. The chances you have a kid who has a drug addiction pretty high. The
Yeah.
chances you've endured some kind of trauma in your life pretty reasonably that we
Sure. Yeah.
all we
Yeah.
all have our stuff, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has some kind of trauma that they've experienced. It might be different than the trauma somebody else has, but
Right.
it's not weighted different necessarily. Now, some people have luxury lives. They're born as the sultan of whatever
Yeah,
country's
Brunei.
kid, like
Yeah.
the sultan of Brunei's kid. Like, okay, that guy probably didn't have so much hardship. But in the United States, if you're just a middle class or lower middle class or especially lower class income wise person, you've had your share of stuff too.
Sure.
And so to hear the government say these things out loud, like, well, this particular crowd gets to be taken care of because of this, because they've had hardships. Eventually, I think enough of those words will be spoken and will fall in the ears of people who have had really dire situations, and they'll just go, you know what, screw you guys,
Yeah.
this is bullshit.
And that's happening. I mean, that's, so you take a look at like, well, so look at Harvard and their admissions policy. So,
Yeah,
you have a bunch of folks of Asian descent who have been excluded at the expense of the folks of African Americans. And it's like,
yeah,
well, we have to make up for past sins. Well, there's a significant portion of the Asian community that didn't have it really good in, the 1800s, that they're basically brought here as slaves to
yeah,
build our intercontinental railroad system, et cetera. So,
yeah.
yeah. And when we start prioritizing,
1941 wasn't a great year for them either, probably.
no, 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 no. Being in an internment camp was probably not a terribly fun thing to have happen. But this is the problem. When you get to the point where everything is based on a hierarchy of victimhood,
Yeah,
then as opposed to, I had this discussion with somebody just recently. It's like, if you have everything based on a hierarchy of how victimized you are, or how victimized not even you are, but maybe your ancestors were, then you rob the person, you rob them of their possible future. So many people, I think, have been robbed of their potential because they've bought into the notion that I can't make it because of something that happened to my ancestors. And
yep,
certainly there's, as you say, there's plenty of disparate outcomes, and all these different things are true throughout society, throughout human history, to be frank. But
yeah.
the basing of everything on that now creates its own new set of evils in the name of addressing past wrongs. And what's the old saying? Two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, the more I've been thinking about this, like the we have to have racism to counter former racism.
Yeah,
And I know this is going to sound super cynical, and I'll just accept it. I'm a cynical person on this and this stuff, but I think that underpinning all of that stuff is just the path of least resistance. I
sure.
would argue it's way easier to say, well, of course we should discriminate against people because our ancestors were discriminated against. Okay,
Right,
that gives you a pass to kind of do whatever the hell you want,
right.
versus a person who is truly introspective and trying to do the right thing and hold up
Yeah,
high moral character, and like
right.
that's a harder path, I would say. And
Yeah.
again, kind of going back to your slouching into mediocrity or whatever that saying was, um, I think that people are just taking the path of least resistance, and in some cases being financially rewarded for that. Like the movie that in
Oh
my
yeah.
racist that just came out highlighted the amount of dollars people are making off of this grift, like the
Oh yeah.
Henry Ibram or whatever, and what's the guy that wrote White Fragility?
Oh,
And
yeah, yeah. If you wouldn't
anyhow,
ask me, I could
whatever
tell
her
you. Yeah,
name is,
yeah,
she lives
yeah.
not too far from you up there in the People's Republic of Washington.
Yes, exactly.
Um, those people are either making money or at a minimum they're giving themselves a pass for bad behavior that would
Right.
be unacceptable 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think about up here, we have tens of millions, billions of dollars being spent. Well, they're not just up here, but on homelessness, people living, wonderful, wonderful lifestyles on the perpetuation of the homelessness problem. So,
Yeah.
yeah, whenever a societal evil or a societal problem becomes a moneymaker, then you've gotten off the path of actually solving it and getting something beneficial happening for the people that are actually suffering. And that really is it's the same things we talked about last week with the climate activists flying all over the world in their G5
Yeah.
jets that
Yeah,
spew
but
out more
Dave, you don't
carbon.
understand that they don't have time for public transportation. Like
That's
you
right. Yeah,
commercial
that's
flights.
right. They're the
You can't understand how important these people are. That's your problem.
You mean there's no bus to Davos? I mean, come on, what's the problem?
There should be.
We should
I would
build a
support.
bridge.
I would pay at least one ticket for a bus to Davos if they live from Miami. So to support your talking about like people not trusting institutions. Here's a survey. Now this is on Twitter. I would guess that people who would answer a survey like this are probably biased to more of a Trump camp than a
Sure.
Kamala camp. So I'm going to preface this by saying that I believe that's true. However, I still think it's fascinating. So here's the survey. The question is, who is responsible for the Russia Ukraine conflict? And the four options are Russia, Ukraine, EU, and USA. 14% of the respondents said Russia, 7% said Ukraine, 6% said EU, 73% said the US.
Oh, really?
Now,
Wow.
can you imagine 20 years ago who's responsible for 9/11 that like or something similar like some
Yeah.
kind of whatever conflict was going on 20 years ago?
Right.
Can you imagine a scenario where 73% of the respondents would have said our government is responsible for this war that's killed hundreds that's
Yeah.
unfathomable to me.
It
I
wouldn't
can't.
have happened. No, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, it just, well, it says something about the level of, you know, yeah, institutional trust and just the belief in whether we can survive as a country.
Yeah, I think that more and more people are. I don't feel like last week you and I posed the question: what percentage of people believe, as you and I do, that the real conflict is values
Yeah.
and kind of Judeo-Christian values slash free markets versus like communism. Like
Right.
there's that conflict. Like what percentage of people think it's like left versus right instead of, as you and I are kind of coming to believe, the insiders versus the outsiders in DC, like that
Sure.
kind of arrangement.
Yeah.
I think that more people are becoming aware that something is amiss,
Yeah.
but I don't think they're quite to the point where they're. And you and I could be wrong. I mean, what do we know? Like we could be completely misdiagnosed in the conflict, but I think that more people are becoming aware that like something's wrong, but they can't quite put their finger on it because there has been censorship. There are
Sure.
media outlets that mask all this stuff. Like the 60 Minutes interview that Kamala Harris just did a couple days ago, where they asked her a point blank question, she fumbled the answer. They released that version,
Yeah.
and then as a tease, a trailer for the show, and then they air a completely different version where they cleaned up her answer. Like I think those kinds of things are starting to kind of permeate our society, and more people are going,
Yeah.
okay, I don't love Trump. RFK is kind of out there. Elon's the richest guy in the world. And he's just putting his finger in their eye. Yes, and something is going on here.
Yeah.
I think more people are kind of waking. Do you believe that, or
I
you think
do.
it's
I mean,
still real compartmentalized?
no, I do. I think that because I think people can look around them when the evidence is in your face. I mean, when the evidence is just all around you all the time, then I think you have to try really, really hard to keep your head buried in the sand. And I think there's a number of people that are just scared that know it sort of beneath the surface, but they don't want it to kind of pop up above the surface, because then that
Yeah.
implies that, well, I might actually have to say something. I might actually have to do something, about it. For a long time, I believed that the institutions could be, well, if we just get the right combination of people in office, if we just if people are going to find out, and we're going to reform this thing without a crisis. Because I'm generally an optimistic person, I believe that for a very long period of time. For most of my life, I believe that, but I don't believe that anymore. It just, sadly, I mean, I want that
Yeah.
to be the case. I want us to be able to get back to, some semblance of a just and fair and continually improving society. Not perfectly just. I know I'm not naive enough to believe that'll ever happen, but to get to a more to get to a more stable society. But I just don't believe that anymore. And I think there's lots and lots of people that kind of fall into that category, and it's just a matter of kind of when the tide rises far enough so that they just have to say, well, I can't deny this any longer. I can't pretend. I can't just hide under a Netflix blanket anymore and just pretend that these things aren't happening. Especially, like I say, when you drive down the road in major cities, when you see boarded up buildings, when you see homeless people everywhere, when you see, when you watch debates and you see that, unserious people talking in these
Yeah.
debates about things, you can't do it.
No, I think that like that Roman quote you said, what do you say? All you gotta
Bread
do
and
is give them
circuses. All you got to do is
bread
give
and
people bread
circuses.
and circuses, and you do whatever you want.
Yeah. Okay, so our version today is all you gotta give them is sugar, alcohol, and weed,
Yeah.
and Netflix.
And Netflix, yeah, and 22 streaming channels, and
Yeah.
then for the socially conscious, then you just have to give them something to be angry about and a bumper sticker at a rally to attend, and you're good.
A mechanism to feel self-righteous and morally
Yeah,
superior to other
right,
folks, and like that's all we need, right?
right, exactly. Yeah,
And so for Kenny G, and those for you listening for the first time, Kenny G is a fictitious character we're talking to 60 years from now or whatever. Kenny G's version might be some other kind of intoxicant or addictive substance. Not. I mean, booze will probably still be around in 60 years.
oh
I'd
yeah,
imagine it might be some kind of um, virtual reality game that they're playing instead of watching Netflix or whatever. But I
right,
suspect it'll be a similar set of circumstances as they encounter or start to enter their crisis era, these cyclical kind of things. Roman times are what, 2,000 years ago.
yeah,
Like we as a species have not evolved a whole lot, even though technology has. And
no,
we're driving flying drones now instead of chariots. But aside from the technological advancements we're taking advantage of, fundamentally we're still kind of the same creatures.
Well, it's really, we've talked about it before, but I think it bears repeating. And it's really because the human being doesn't change all that much. What we wear and, whether and what we drive, et cetera, whether it's a chariot or if it's a Tesla, the trappings of being human change. And certain societal improvements happen. In Western cultures, we've done away with slavery for the most part, but other cultures haven't. So, these things don't change all that much. But the trappings do, and I think the real danger is when you believe that you can perfect the human. If you look at when the greatest atrocities have happened in throughout history, it's when somebody sets out on the utopian road to perfect the human creature. That's what Mao was all about. Mao Zedong. He was
Yeah.
about, the perfecting. I remember when, I mean, I wasn't there, but I remember hearing when Kissinger talked to Mao, when Kissinger and Nixon visited China. He was the first American president to visit since the Chinese Revolution. And And Mao didn't want to be thought of as a political leader. He wanted to be thought of as a philosopher. I mean, that's what he basically told Henry Kissinger is, no, I'm just the philosopher that's behind all of this. So if you look at that, you look at, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich and the experiments of Joseph Mengele and, horrible, evil things. Or if you look at even, go back in ancient times to what the Roman Empire, some of the Roman emperors thought that they would be. They thought that they could perfect the human creature. And whenever you think that you can make humans to be superhuman, or, now there's this notion of transhumanism, whenever you think that, that's when you get into the area where you're going to start doing bad things. Utopianism always leads to oppression and atrocity.
Well, I agree, because what I think, again, I'm not a psychologist, obviously, or a sociologist or behavioral specialist. I'm none of those things, obviously. But I think what happens there is when you have the belief that you could and should do those things, you come to believe that you're godlike,
Right.
right?
Yes.
And how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you believe you're godlike in those respects, then you're godlike in other respects. And pretty soon those other things you start doing start encroaching upon other people's liberties and freedoms. And
Right.
they get pissed off after a while.
They don't like it. Yeah, exactly right. And so it's a story as old as time. It's the story of the Tower of Babel in the Bible, when they thought they could construct something that would reach to heaven, and what did they get? They got confusion out of it.
Yeah. So one of the things that is happening in this moment that I think is maybe one of the highlights of the story is the different paths media has taken, right? So you have traditional rock solid Walter Cronkite media, who is now like going virtually step for step with the more progressive kind of
Right.
ideology and like running cover for them in many
Right.
respects. And then you have platforms like Twitter/X and Substack and these kind of quote unquote alternative journalism outlets that are doing the work that traditional outlets used to do, and the traditional corporate media seems to be losing credibility, well
Yep.
deserved in my opinion.
Oh yeah.
And these quote unquote fringe or outlier or alternative news sources have been proven to be right enough that they're getting more credence. So for example, here's a headline. This is on Twitter. It's from a page called National World. I don't know what that is, but it appears to be kind of a news site. And the headline is: Police officer who recorded himself having sex with 13-year-old girl close to tears as he gets jail. And so he gets sentenced to jail for quote unquote recording himself having sex with a 13-year-old girl. So on Twitter, it gets community noted, and the community note says a child cannot consent. Correct language is important. He did not have sex with that girl. He raped her. Now, there's no way in the world that kind of correction would have happened on CBS. CBS would have this on their
Right.
headline, and the people reading CBS News would go, oh, yeah, the guy had sex with a 13-year-old girl. But on Twitter and these quote unquote alternative sites, people are like, no, that's not having sex. That's called
Right.
rape.
Yeah.
And that's why the guy got jail. He didn't get jail for recording himself. He got
Right.
jail because he raped the girl.
Yeah.
And it's these little twists and little alterations and omissions and changing of definitions that I think people are again, these little subtle things piling up over time, I think are helping people just figure out we're not being given the whole story in many cases. Like these little tiny alterations like this, and people probably see hundreds of these a week now. If they're
Yeah.
watching CNN or reading the New York Times or even the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post and things like that, Facebook, all these organizations that are kind of in lockstep with the progressive movement are doing these little shadings of this kind of stuff. And the only place where you don't get that now is these quote unquote alternative news places.
Yeah, and I think people it's so pervasive now that it's hard not to notice. It's hard not to notice the fundamental. It's sort of back to that Goldberg quote. It's hard not to notice when the rules and traditions have changed so much. We used to call them pedophiles, and now we call them minor attracted individuals. So
minor attracted persons, I think, is the
persons or something
correct
like that. Yeah,
vernacular.
exactly.
Yeah.
So when you begin to change all of the fundamental basics of society, it's hard not to notice. Now, I mean, for a while people will go along and they'll say, "Oh, well, there they go again." But eventually it's like, wait a minute, I can't just keep saying there they go again when
Yeah.
everything is changing. Even that's why you find I was listening to somebody today talking about how there is a tremendous number of former Democrats, people that are still liberals. They're, Tulsi Gabbard, Kristen Sinema, Joe Manchin.
Yeah.
Look at all these people in our time that are throughout my lifetime have been on the opposite side of the aisle because they have a liberal worldview. I've got a conservative worldview, but we generally both wanted the betterment of society and good outcomes for everybody and all that. It's just we thought of these things getting there in different ways. But they have to distance themselves from this extreme progressive agenda because it just makes absolutely zero sense at all, and it's damaging. And so as more and more and more and more of that happens, then eventually, where's the tipping point? There is a tipping point. It does happen, and because you're just not going to go along like this forever. And when that happens, then you're going to have some change.
Well, and I think the other end of that spectrum is people who kind of have hitched themselves to this progressive wagon, as in they're the more well educated, more evolved, intellectually superior. Like, of course, we're not using the language our grandparents did because they're a bunch of rubes. Like we've evolved and we're more sophisticated.
Right.
But now they're stuck though, because these things are getting more and more idiotic in the way that they all make these alterations. Like this thing, like the guy was having sex with a 13-year-old. No, it's called
Right.
rape.
Yeah, exactly.
And those people who are stuck with themselves hitched to this wagon of progressivism, like how do they get out? Like they've made their entire identity about being these more educated, more sophisticated, forward-thinking people. And as these examples get more and more ludicrous, like where are they supposed to go to acknowledge that, okay, this has gone too far, that you have to undo all the years that you had your sanctimonious highbrow looking down your nose at people. That's gotta suck. I mean, that's gotta be horrible for somebody.
Well, it's kind of the analogy that comes to mind is you've got your boat moored at the dock in the bay, and you think, wouldn't it be nice to just be out here a little bit on the water some more? So you unmoor your boat and think, well, I'm just going to go a little bit out here, but the tide goes out, and eventually you're out in the middle of the ocean, you're about to drown. Well, this is what's happening right now with some of these things. Now, we don't want to be tied to some of those rules, those restrictive rules of the past that we had in the 90s and the 80s and the early 2000s. We don't want to be burden ourselves with these things. We're free. We're smart enough. We're philosopher kings. We can make it, and then it's coming back to eat them. It's coming back to bite them. Frankenstein.
You wake up one day, you're out in the middle of the ocean with Dick Cheney.
Yeah, you're in a little bit of a world of hurt there. Frankenstein eventually comes home, and I think to a great extent that's
you and Dick Cheney and Hunter Biden and Nancy Pelosi, and you're like, how the hell did I get here?
Yeah, well, who invited me to this dinner party? I don't want to come to this dinner party.
Yeah. All right, Dave. So as you and I are recording this now, I think we're about 4 weeks away from the election.
Yeah.
And so this is not a prediction podcast by any stretch, but I think it's be interesting. Again, we're recording this kind of chronicling what it's like to go through this period.
Yeah.
I think it'd be interesting for Kenny G to hear your perspective on what do you think. Again, I'm not asking you to predict like who wins. I'm not asking that, but just like what are you expecting / anticipating, not in a hopeful way, but like in a pragmatic, like what as you look forward a month from now and then 2 more months after that, but the next 30 to 90 days, whatever happens, like what are you expecting?
I think one of the safest bets, this is an easy one because I hate predicting. I think one of the safest bets is whoever wins, the other side's going to say they cheated.
Yep. 100%.
Whoever wins. Now, it'll be on different paths, right? It's going to be on different paths. But that's certainly going to happen.
Yep.
Whoever wins, the other side's going to basically say democracy is over.
Yep.
Whoever wins, there will be about 7.5, maybe 8 seconds of okay, I'm going to be the leader for everybody, and then they will turn, and then it will turn the
Yep.
opposite direction. So all of that will happen. Um, Whoever wins, there will be. Right now, we have potential um, uh, disagreements with our neighbors. We have potential, well, you're voting for that person. I mean, come on, you know. Uh, After that happens, there will be a significant portion of the country, half of the country probably ish, 30% maybe of the more hardened partisans will be in despair. And
Yeah.
honestly, I tell you, honestly, more than any other election, I think that's an incredibly dangerous thing. I think it's going to
Yeah.
be incredibly dangerous. I mean, I so all of those things I think are givens. I don't think it's a stretch at all because
Yeah.
the I remember Harris saying something to the effect of, well, we're going to get things back to normal. Whatever happens after the election, it's not going to be normal. Whether it's Trump or it's Harris, it's not going to be
No.
normal.
Yeah.
And the expectation will then be I think after that, there'll be a ratcheting up of the angst, even from where it is today, because it's like, this side wins. They won. They cheated. Somehow they cheated. I don't know how they cheated, but they cheated.
Yep.
And now you're going to do all of these things. Now the resistance starts, whether it's
Yep.
this side resistance or that side resistance. I don't know, Brian. I think I think there's a lot of very easy to predict and very dire things, and it's going to be tough.
Yeah, the election integrity thing. I was thinking about this question a couple days ago, and I wanted to pose it to you because I think that. So my personal opinion is this as far as election integrity. I do believe that elections, the way we do it, is kind of dumb. Like we have all these electronic mechanisms that not saying anybody has. I think there's evidence to support the idea that it probably has happened, but
Sure.
they could be manipulated, they could be infiltrated, they could be altered.
Yeah.
Okay, there's all these things. If it happened enough to sway an election, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. But there seems to be this notion that if your side won or is anticipated to win, that your tinfoil hat guy to say those things happened.
Right.
If your side loses or is anticipated to lose, of course there's election problems,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it's not a partisan thing.
No.
It probably varies by state to state, like whoever's leading or wins, like the losing side thinks that they lost. So here's my
Right.
question to you. Would it be worse to have a straight up fair election, 100% accurate, but people thought it was manipulated? Or would it be worse to have a manipulated straight up election, the votes are counted 100% right, but it was actually was manipulated, or for people to think it's straight up I'm getting it backwards here. If people think the election was counted properly, but it really wasn't behind the scenes, is that worse than the inverse of that, which would be it wasn't tampered, but people thought it was? Which do you think of those would be worse?
Well, it depends on the level that you consider. On the level of what would be worse for the society, the
Yeah,
distrust in the election results would be the worst part, because then lots of very existential bad things are on the docket. So that
because
on
you'll have only one other recourse. If your
yeah,
voice isn't heard, there's only one other
yeah,
mechanism,
if
right?
you don't trust that the system, the electoral system works, then yeah, you really don't have any. You've got two choices. You either give up and say, well, whatever, I don't care if I live in a corrupt world. I'm just going to do the best I can and hopefully live a long life, or you're going to take up arms and resist and do bad
Yeah.
things. I mean, that's
So
really it.
if we both agree that it would be worse to have a straight up election where people thought it was altered
Yeah,
than to have an altered election that people thought was legit, if
yeah,
we accept that premise, which I agree with
yeah,
you on, it blows my mind that there is zero interest in both parties to fix that. Like they're
yeah,
okay with this perception of elections being. There's enough of that. There's like a faint whisper, a faint smell of truth to it. They allow to happen,
yeah,
to give them plausible deniability whenever they lose, risking everything.
Yeah.
Like that is a monumental risk they're taking by not resolving this. And like, okay, we're doing it like France does or whatever these other countries,
Right.
Bolivia or whatever, where they count the entire election by hand in 4 hours.
Right.
We're not interested in that, risking the entire society's structure so that they can have this little whiff of the necessary cover if they lose. It's just indicative of like how their priorities are just complete lost.
Well, you know what it is. I think there's something particularly American about that too. And we are so competitive. We're the most competitive place on the planet.
Yeah.
And we are all, and we're very short term. We're insanely short term. So you put competitiveness and short term mentality, win at all costs. You put all those things on the table, and it's like, yeah, it would be great if we could fix it long term, but we got to win now because democracy is at stake.
Right.
It's you put those things together, and the French are like, yeah, we're going to take a break and have some cheese and wine and
Yeah.
get to this thing later.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, that's us. I think that's a lot of it is, I mean, I love our society. I think our society is the best in the world, but, but this is an artifact of that, in my opinion, that is very damaging and could likely, I mean, it's put us where we're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the original question, like, what do you think's going to happen? I think there's a small percentage, like, again, maybe 30% or less, who believe if their party wins, awesome, like everything's gonna be great. I think 70% or more think that no matter who wins, like it's just gonna be the next rung on the ladder leading towards more negative outcomes, because whichever side wins, the other side's gonna just lose their shit. It's
Well,
just gonna come unglued.
I would add one more layer to that because I agree with that. I think that's true. I would add one more layer to that. I think there's probably half the people. I think there's probably 50% of the people that even if you really probed, if you pushed beneath the surface, they would admit what we just said is true. But they're hoping against hope that we're going to
Yeah.
return to normal. We're going to return to normal. And this is the glass is 3/4 full when it's only 1/4 full. I mean, I would love to believe that there's such a thing as return to normal. But I think there's enough of and this is where that bread and circuses comes in. There's enough distractions so that, well, this and this, oh, I'm just going to go watch Lord of the Rings or whatever, so there's enough of that so that you can, if you don't think about it too hard, if you don't think about it too heavily, if you don't listen to podcasts or spend any time on Twitter, you can ignore it enough so that you can believe that it's going to be okay, because it's always been okay before.
Yeah. I would add one thing further, and that is if Harris wins or if Trump wins and they take him out somehow, whatever. And we continue down the path we've been on for the last, let's say 16 years. Trump was a speed bump in there, but he still got kind of rolled by the people in charge of the institutions, right? And he's admitted as such, right?
Yeah.
If Harris wins, we will continue down this path. And I think by the next election, it will be bad enough by then that people will not be complacent anymore. They will not be relying on hope as their driver. They will want serious action.
Sure.
And I think that in that election, I think it'll be bad enough by then that people will be willing to do whatever it takes. I mean, violence. I mean, like the percentage of people who vote is like, 38% on average per election.
Yeah.
The last election was considerably higher. This one I expect to be considerably higher than average. Like it'll probably be like 60% or something like that. If Harris wins, I think the next election, the voter turnout will be something like we've never seen before.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I think I mean, there's an inevitable march of history here that I think, makes that likely almost regardless at this point, because of this march towards where we're going to, however we get there, I think it's going to be a tough 4 years. I think the next 4 years is going to be tough.
Well, like Dan Bongino is fond of saying, and plenty of people before him, it's just not bad enough yet. And because people are still relying on that hope and strong desire to be taken care of, and strong desire to not have to worry about it. And if we just get through this, we're going to be fine. I
Right.
think every election demonstrates that that's less and less likely
Yeah.
to be the case.
Exactly right. Yep.
All right. Well, hey, as Dave mentioned in the opening, we're trying to explain to Kenny G what this moment in time is like. We're kind of chronicling what's going on as we go through this march towards our cycles of crisis and things like that, waiting for the rebirth, so to speak. But hey, if you think we got something wrong, you think we're missing the point on something, you think we're misexplaining something, we'd love to hear that feedback. You can do that at unsilentpodcast.com, or Rumble has a great comment section. You can voice your opinion there. We'd love to have Kenny G hear more than just our two voices. And that's it for this week. And until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.